Congratulations on this movie's 8 Oscar nominations, including for all 3 of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's very well deserved for this really wonderful movie that is fresh on these people's minds. Can I just start by asking you all for a favorite scene or favorite moment from this movie that they all just saw?
I like the scene with Stanley and Rafe, where they're on the staircase at night discussing whether or not they should do tactical voting. I really like that scene.
My favourite moment is actually when Stanley and Rafe, or Stanley has apologised to Rafe for treating him badly, and then we cut from that scene where he's decided his name to the shot of the empty ballot in front of him. I just love that moment. The decision in front of him.
I love the umbrella scene.
I also like every scene where Tedesco vapes.
Yes.
Yeah.
My favourite bit.
Same. Not to do a tangent right away, but was that actor's idea? I heard that.
That was that actor's idea.
So crazy. That's
I wish
so
I could take credit
interesting.
for that, but that was
That's
his idea.
so wild. So he brought it to set?
I think he vapes anyway, and I think he just wanted to keep on vaping basically, and Edward let him.
Well, this is a room full of actors, so we're starting off on the note of be inspired, but bring your inspirations to set. Let's start with you, Peter, in terms of the origins of this product, because you are so at the beginning of this process. Explain to us what was your relationship with this book, this novel that this movie is based on? What do you remember about reading it for the first time, and how did this all come about?
I got sent it by a friend, a producer, Tessa Ross, and I read it in about one day. I was really gripped by it. It's Robert Harris, wonderful writer. It was smart. It was sort of elegant. It was a real page turner. I was really gripped. Kind of as a political thriller. And there were a couple of moments. There was one very early on where Cardinal Tremblay, John's character, says about the dead Pope, about the news of the dead Pope, or it's trending online. And that sort of made me laugh, and that was the seed of all of those moments where the ancient collides with the modern, or the cardinal vaping, or going outside for a cigarette, or having mobile phones, and I found that really interesting. And then it's the homily that Rafe's character gives, where he says, "Give us a Pope who doubts." When I read that, I thought, I want to do this. Yeah.
How many drafts were there, and what was the relationship with Edward like?
It was I did 3 drafts, and then Edward was on board, and then we kept on working on it. And interestingly, we tried a lot of sort of different things. We tried some slightly different beginnings, and there were various versions of the end, but largely we kept on going back to something that was very close to the book, to be honest.
So wonderful. Nick, for you, talk to me about tension. Because I think that's one of the main elements of this movie, and I do think a lot of that comes down to you. That correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of that is in the editor's hands.
It is, but a good script with a good director will set up those moments for an editor to exploit. But yes, I mean, it was something that we, obviously paid a lot of attention to, and so much of it is to do with the way that Edward decided to film it, his approach to this. He was very inspired by the 70s political paranoid thrillers like All the President Men and The Parallax View, and the way in which they, he photographed those films, and the way the scenes are structured. There's not a lot of cutting. You don't revisit the same setup more than once. So this was Edward's approach, and I think that helps create tension. And also just when we, constantly looking at the film, seeing what we could tie together, closely together. And I sort of review films by weirdly, you spend all this time figuring out these cuts and how these bits join together. But when you watch it back, I've sort of trained myself to not look at the cuts and actually look at the flow of information and the flow of the story. And that's where you can see if there's tension or if there's, slack or things like that. So that's sort of how I approach it. And then you can sort of spot those areas where you maybe need to. And then there was, a lot of sound design that helped create tension as well, and silence as well. It's a very quiet place, when they're in, these places, voting and so on.
Yeah, well, and we're definitely going to get to the solid. We have a great audience question about the silence. Can I ask you mentioned this idea of the inspirations. When Edward said, did he say to you, these 70s movies like All the President's Men, and are you then using that as a frame of reference?
No, I mean, it was something that, when I first met him to talk about it, I said to him, this reminded me of the Parallax View, just from reading it. And he was very excited that I'd, came up with this reference because, these were films that he admired. But it was definitely, something that we'd obviously, like to aspire to. And it's to his taste, even in his other work. He doesn't like to, be very cutty or editing to be really seen unless you want to see it. He wants every cut to be motivated, to be extremely precise. And because Edward always says, he says, why are we cutting? He finds looking at an actor's face just the most interesting thing, just let's watch and see what's going on. And especially when you've got Ralph Fiennes, you can just watch him, he doesn't have to be speaking, but there's always something being transmitted in a really interesting way.
So that's this idea of silence, which this is a fabulous question from the audience about silence in the Vatican. It's the papal conclave. It's very quiet. Volker, how do you approach, when you first heard about this project, what were you immediately gravitating towards in terms of the composing?
Well, I was looking for music, religious music. I was looking for something that maybe can represent the Vatican, but also that can represent a kind of idealistic religious state of mind. And obviously, Edward and me, we were talking about it, and I immediately had the idea that I don't take choir and don't take organ, but I needed to find something that has a similar quality. And so I looked into instruments, and I was somehow thinking about glass instruments, and like the glass harp. So I looked at the glass harp, but the glass harp was too classy. So, but there was another instrument that has a similar principle called the crystal bachet, and it's an instrument that has glass rods as the material that you play, and it's 4 octaves, and you put your hands in water, and then you rub the glass rods, and then you have metal plates that are resonators, and they start to distort. So it is in a way glass sound that becomes a distorted glass sound. And I sent that to Edward, and Edward said, "Oh, I really love the sound." And then we put it always when Ralph is somehow in doubt, or when he's praying, or during not during his speech, but during the when they are sitting in the cinema, like a theater, which is a fantastic scene. It is a little bit like this one, but with green seats. And so we put it always when we had the feeling there's some religious idea above them, and that piece in a way became also the end piece, because the very end, the end credits, is in a way that theme, but orchestrated, and then the crystal bachet disappeared.
So interesting, and I need to see a visual of this crazy instrument. That sounds so interesting.
I can highly recommend to see it. It looks like a spaceship, and it is really what is always nice is that you have an instrument that doesn't need electricity, but it creates a sound that is otherworldly. I really, I can highly recommend to watch a video of that. It's amazing.
So interesting. And I want to hear about, can I ask just for the basic relationship between an editor and a composer, where you're both inspired by the visuals and what you've been handed in terms of footage, right? How did the two of you work together, and I suppose with Edward?
Well, when we're editing the film, we there's several ways you can approach it, but I tend to leave music off it. Quite often you use temp music when you're editing the film, first of all, just temporary score to try and, music from other films perhaps, to try and set a tone and so on. But we decided, and I tend not to do this, is to put too much temp music on earlier on. So we actually left music off for quite a long time. And when we did sort of try to put some bits of temp music on, we could never find the right sort of feeling. And Edward was very keen that the music wouldn't be too comforting to the picture, that it would sort of sit against it. So yeah, when Volker comes on, we just send him what we have cut, and then he responds to it, and through conversations, and then it inspires us sometimes. But generally, we have the picture set, and then Volker adds, and then occasionally we might change the picture a little bit, but it's kind of like that.
That sounds maybe that I don't like that, because they don't pay attention to music, but it's actually the other way around. I really like that the picture when it arrives, that it's so well done, that I can watch it and I'm like, yeah, it can work without music in a way, and then I have to figure out what sense music makes in the movie, because otherwise I'm invited and just put music on every scene, and the problem is that when you start with one scene and you do the next and the next, suddenly you are forced to do music all over the film, because when you do it there, you have to do it there, and you have to do it there, and suddenly the whole film is completely music. And but because the silence is so important, and I think silence need obviously a good acting, a good camera, and a good story. So when you have silence, or just a conversation, then obviously the text has to be very good. And when I received the film the first time, I was like, okay, I can now choose the spots very precisely. And we've chosen a lot of times ramps, so that the music just creates like this wave up to a moment where it just hits, and then suddenly there's silence. And when you use the hit carefully, after that what that hit has an impact. And so that was mainly the method how we used music in a lot of scenes.
Peter, do you hear music when you write?
Yes, I write to music.
Okay.
Strangely, I always have. When I was a little boy, when I was 4, they used to find me with the speakers from the record player on either side of my head. I used to listen to great war themes and great Western themes. Apparently, he used to put those records on again and again. And I think I was kind of running through films in my head. And I always write with headphones on and listen to music. And I usually have one piece of music which becomes a sort of touchstone for a particular project, which I listen to again and again when I'm writing.
Okay. And what was that for this?
I never say what they are.
Oh,
but what's interesting
secret.
is that it's never the kind of music that makes sense. It's, like on Wolf Hall, it was a piece of sort of Latin dance music that didn't sound like it had anything to do with the Tudor court, but for some reason it connected for me.
Well, and I love this idea too of like, it's too cliche to go in the direction of organ and choir. Instead, we're inventing otherworldly sounds. Can I ask all three of you, what does the final product look like compared to what was in your head? Particularly, what do you remember about like seeing it for the first time with an audience?
I was really surprised by how much people laughed when I saw it with an audience. Because we know those little sort of gags that are in there, like the coffee machine and the vape. I sort of felt like they were just little jokes for us, really. So it was, but I think what happened was it's such a sacred space, and that there's a kind of grandeur about the Cardinals, so that when the audience are given permission to laugh, they could really relax and enjoy it. So that was really lovely, seeing it with the proper audience for the first time.
It's really strange for an editor, because you start at literally the very first second of footage that is shot, and you spend so much time with it over so many iterations, and the cut evolves for months and months and months, and then you sort of arrive at this place. And I think if you ever write or try to write a roadmap of how you might get there, you would never be able to do it. It's a total evolution. So when I see the film for the first time, if it's too soon after I've finished, it's quite difficult. I can't sort of really be objective about it, or I can still see all the cuts. It's like even though I know they're fine. We spent a lot of time, but you still sort of feel everything, and you can see the areas that you had to, that you maybe struggled with or what have you. But So yeah, 6 months later when I watch it, then I'm sort of clear of it. But like Peter, I mean, I was so pleased when I could hear a pin drop in the cinema, you know, that people were so in it, and that's very satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like a concert, you know, when you sit in the audience and with a film. Well, as a musician, when you do a concert, obviously you have the reaction of the audience always as a part of the performance. But as a filmmaker, I think sitting in the audience and presenting your film is, I think, maybe quite similar to that. And when I was watching it, I think I think it's in its completeness. The first time was at the Toronto Film Festival, which is a wonderful festival where the audience is very responsive, I think. And so I have always the feeling that when the film is over and I feel something in me, even though I've worked on the film, that I feel like, oh, this is somehow touching me. And I can maybe even go again and see the film the second time. Then I think there's something right with the film. And I think with this film, it had laughter, it had humor, it had tension. In the film, there's something to learn. There's so much stuff in there that even when I'm working on it and afterwards, I would love to go in a pub with someone and talk about it. You know, like talk about philosophy, about religion.
Yeah, it really holds a lot of different tones, and it is dealing with some very heavy themes, and yet it is somehow quite funny. I want to ask all three of you, because I think that all three of you might have completely different ways of answering this, but how do you deal with empathy in your work? How do you weaponize empathy, I guess? It's sort of the question of, like, Conclave is a great example of riding a balance between this is entertainment and we have permission to laugh, and yet there's this ending. We got to talk about the ending. I mean, how much are you thinking about engendering empathy in the audience? How much are you thinking about creating characters, particularly characters that are like that we can relate to and maybe feel for, but that they're still flawed? Actors don't want to play perfect characters. Actors want to play flawed, juicy characters.
I mean, obviously, because it came from a book, that I think the starting point for me was my response to the characters in the book and to Rafe's character, Lawrence, or Lamelli, as he's called in the book. And he's a kind of hero that I really like. I did a film called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and George Smiley is the main character in that. And I sort of felt there was a kinship between the two. I like characters that are sort of beaten down, a little bit bruised, nearly defeated, but holding on in there, and find a kind of courage to do what needs to be done. And I felt like Lamelli was that character. So basically, I guess I feel that kind of warmth and sympathy for the character, and then you just try and make sure that the audience are going to feel the same way.
And I guess that's what I want to ask the two of you, is how much are you thinking about manipulating heartstrings, really, with your work?
I wouldn't say manipulating heartstrings, but definitely, you're trying to, I guess, put people on the character's shoulders in a way. You want them to be right beside Lawrence when he's in these moments. And, we've all had choices to make in life. We've all been there and had decisions to make. So it's finding somehow connection and making it seem sort of relatable. And often what I do, and I let the actors sort of guide me in a way in terms of, and how to position them within scenes and how that works, but yeah, sorry, that's not a very good answer, but
no, it's amazing. And Volker?
Well, I think music is in a sense very effectful also to distance the audience from the feeling that you want to transport in a way, and that even makes you more involved as someone who's watching the film. You don't get forced to feel something, and I think that's very important, that you are in a way always feel that you are yourself have a feeling to the film and to the characters. If you're getting manipulated, you slowly, I would lose interest at some point when I feel like, oh, they are just pushing me to that corner and to that corner. And with music, a lot of times, Edward, for example, is a big fan of not using music in doubling things or, even pleasing things. He sometimes says, destroy the picture, please, which means in a way to go a little bit against it or to use it in a different area where you normally wouldn't expect music. So I think it's not really not manipulation. I think it's much more, trying to balance things. That's my feeling.
Amazing. And of course, as we've said, good acting is what kind of ties a lot of this together. Nick, I love what you said about, I want to ask you about what it is that makes it so that you can't cut away from an actor's face. I think editors, maybe, are you asked this all the time, that like actors want to know, how do I act in such a way that an editor doesn't want to cut away from me?
Well, it's a combination of things, but Edward and I, when we're editing, we often talk about impulses, and we're very interested in leaving the shot as long as possible before we sort of feel the impulse to cut. And I think that's just about truth. That's just about, you're sort of in this rhythm, you're watching what the actor's doing and you understand. And then when you need a response or an answer to something, or to see what the other person is saying, you would cut to them. But I'm not sure there's any trick to, but it's all sort of about impulse and about where you want the audience to be in sort of the next thought, I suppose.
Well, and I'm going to ask you all for your definition of great acting, because I think that's always like, you always get lots of different questions, like answers to that. But can I ask you, in any of your writing, are you picturing actors in mind when you're writing a script? It's really hard to imagine anyone other than Ralph Fiennes in this role.
I don't. It's interesting. Even when I know who the actor is who's going to play the part, still in my mind, and I am running a version of the film in my mind, but the character, I always sort of imagine, it's the real person that's in my head, which is crazy because it's a literary character, obviously. But it's not an actor; it's the real person. And then sometimes, if we're doing a rewrite or something, so we already have footage of, say, Rafe, then the face starts to become a kind of blurred mix of Rafe and whatever character I had in my head.
Wow. And so what is your screenwriterly question to, your answer to what makes great acting?
Oh, and just say my lines. That's all. Say
your lines. What a great answer, actually. Say them correctly, say them well.
Correctly, yeah. Don't get in the way of the furniture. I don't. You know what? I mean, I really wanted to be an actor when I was young, and I was terrible. A really, really terrible actor. So I've kind of find it a bit of a magical art, to be honest. I don't really understand how you do it. So I'm always in awe. So I wish I could define it, but I always just stand back and marvel at good acting.
What about you guys?
Goodness, I don't know. I mean, it's so much of my response to acting is just sort of on the performances. Instinct is just what I feel, and whether something feels right for the moment or feels less right. So yeah, and I think it's on a great. It's on a spectrum, I suppose. It's all shades of interesting performance, but I think something truthful is makes good acting, I think.
Yeah, well, I have the feeling I see the film already mostly when it's cut. So I think I see already the scenes that are filtered in a way. You
don't see any of the bad acting?
No, actually not. And I would say in a way, I mean, acting is not only that what I see, it's also what, under the circumstances is produced. I mean, sometimes you have difficult circumstances, or the director is a little bit confused in terms of what should they do, or what. So what I think is, for example, in Edward's films so far, I worked now on 5 films. Every time when the film came on my table, on my screen, I was like, okay, this is really good. So it felt like there was a lot of a good chemistry, and I think that's, I guess, as well something that is very important. That the chemistry between the people on set, I guess, is fantastic. So I think it's a difficult question in terms of saying that's what I see is fantastic and that's good acting. I think it's maybe a combination out of all these things together.
I guess I want to know how, I think people in this room want to know, how do we get to that point where we are only in the circles that we're in is only just the creme de la creme, like the best collaborators there are? Like, do you want to give advice for each of your professions, for each of your line of work, like for aspiring editors and composers and writers? What is the advice that you give, or that you wish you had gotten earlier in your career?
Well, I mean, the advice I would give is to watch as many films as possible, and that sounds really obvious, but somebody's told it to me, and it really helped me watch the bad ones and the good ones, because it is a language, and especially when you're editing, it's a visual grammar, and the more you see, the more you understand how it works, and maybe some of the traps and the things that are less good. But I think that's it. Is for me is just to watch, and because the technological side of it, changes and can be learnt and can be taught, but the actual storytelling and the the visual shape of things is something that you just need to. I just did it by osmosis, just by watching and watching and watching.
I can sort of the partner to that. I think it's really useful to read screenplays rather than just watch the film, because you see it stripped of everyone else's work, and you can see exactly what the screenwriter was doing. So I always find that really useful. And then my other bit of advice, which sounds incredibly corny, is to follow your heart, in the sense that if you feel a connection with the project, if you genuinely feel a connection with the project, then do it and go with it, Because on paper, Conclave didn't look like it was going to end up being, this. It's a story about some old men locked in a room. So it didn't feel like it had box office success written all over it. But I really loved it, and I think that's the rule, just go with the ones that you feel a connection with.
Yeah, I think maybe my advice would go in a kind of a similar direction. I think I would always advise to follow the people that are working in the team that is supporting as well your strength, and was in a way a team that is positive thinking. So and I learned slowly that I can find that out very early in my first meeting, that that there is something where I feel the work could be not easy, but there is some sympathy and some energy that makes me growing in a way. And I think my feeling is that besides if I'm a musician or someone else, or I'm working, having a different job, I think I'm actually feeling that I'm on earth to grow innerly. And so my feeling is that people I work with, I want to spend time with, and I want to learn in a way. And I think that's maybe makes you better.
Yeah. Like following your gut in that way too, of like, who do I want to collaborate with, who I'm going to meld with. Yeah. I have to let you all go soon, but can I ask, what will each of you maybe take away from this project? And that can be philosophical things about the themes of this movie, anything kind of these beautiful themes in this movie, or it could be like, I learned a practical skill that I never did on any other movie that I'll probably use on my next one.
Well, I would say I learned that I think I'm for music, it's maybe better to use themes in the philosophical way in a film rather than themes that are connected with protagonists, because that makes it much more tied together. And I did that already with All Quiet on the Western Front somehow, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I was just intuitively doing it. And now this time I learned it gives me much more freedom, but it also creates in the film a quite strong mood. So that's what I learned.
Amazing.
For me, it was about our original intention was to try and, be very formally rigorous with, the shots and how we put it together. And actually, what I'll take away is that we were able to hold on to that, but still make something that was, entertaining and, accessible and people enjoyed. So that I'm really proud of the fact that we were still, what we aspired to, we, managed to hold on to throughout the whole process. Yeah.
I'm taking away a Golden Globe, so I'm really happy with that.
Congratulations on these Oscar nominations and on all the nominations, and yes, your Golden Globe. It's all so very well deserved. The makers of Conclave, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.